Hello, this is Curtis Jones again. I'm doing chapter 3. I had the opportunity to work on it again, and so I thought I'd post another chapter of the books that I've written. This is Dad's Old Truck, Volume 1. I have written uh, 14 books so far, and there's probably 60 or 80 chapters in those books. And I had decided to do one chapter out of a book until I finish that book and then do the next book and the next book till I posted every chapter of every book I've written. And if you enjoy these things, like my channel, subscribe to it. You'll get notifications every time I post a new uh, chapter or a new video. And if you just can't wait to hear these things, there's my web presence. But you can also go to Amazon.com and search for Curtis Jones uh, under ebooks or just books because they come in ebooks, paperback, and now I'm starting to convert them into hardback books. If you enjoy them, I'd like to hear from you. The third chapter in Dad's Old Truck, Volume 1, is Over the Abyss, and his childhood memories from 1957. The anticipation of the trip. The talk about the trip to California had been going on for some time. Most of the kids had lost interest in the talk and had given up on the idea of a trip to that far away exotic place. But there was renewed interest when we began to do the preparation. The trip would take 3 days each direction. We lived in eastern central Oklahoma. The trip would only take 2 days if we traveled Route 66, but we wanted to go through Colorado and see the Rockies. Mom and Dad had told us of the great mountain that reached to the skies. We wanted to see those huge, majestic towers of God's creation. In Oklahoma, the tallest mountain was there where my Aunt Helen lived in Stillwell, as far as we knew. This mountain was a full 1,000 feet above the valleys that were around it. The mountain was simply called Workman's Mountain. Our ears would pop when we went to visit Aunt Helen. She lived on the very top of the mountain. Mom and Dad said that our ears might pop 8 or 10 times when we went over the Rockies. We were told that even in June, there would possibly be snow on the tops of the mountains. We could hardly imagine that because in June in Oklahoma, we had not seen snow for 3 or maybe 4 months, and maybe not since January. This seemed like a strange and wonderful place that didn't have to be like home was. It was as if they had their own rules to live by. You have to remember that there was no television in most homes, so to see something like this was to see a photograph or see it in person. We had seen ourselves as explorers going to the west to see what the original mountain men had seen. We had a relative that had spoken, or that was spoken of from time to time, who was called by the name of California Joe. We kids called him Okie Joe because This is where he came from, not California. He is said to have gone to California to seek his fortune and ended up in Wyoming and Montana, where he was a guide to the Army at Fort Bridger in Wyoming. He had traveled to a trading post in Montana where he had to take cover from Indian attacks on the trading post or at the trading post. All were killed by the trading or at the trading post by a band of intoxicated Indians. The only survivor was a 13-year-old girl who had been told to go and hide in the gully behind the trading post by her father. That is where my ancestor found her, crying and cold and wet from the water in the gully. He buried her parents and learned that she had no living relatives. He said he would take care of her, and about a year later, they were married. And they came back to the Indian Territory to live out their days. With these kinds of thoughts in our heads, we were overwhelmed with the excitement. We kept a running calendar to know when we were leaving Oklahoma for the Great Western Mountains. We had been in California before, but we went via Route 66 and was going to a different. This was going to be different. We were so excited and so tired when we arrived in California, going through Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, that we were sure that the trip through the mountains was going to be easier and more fun to the kids. Think of all the things we would see, the peaks of purple mountain majesties that we sang about in school, lakes that were turquoise and roads that were not straight and long like they are across the South. On Route 66, you could pop over one hill and see the top of the next hill about 7 miles away. And the road was straight, especially in the California desert. There might be some kind of settlement at the bottom of the valley, but the whole trip was in burning heat, even in June. We imagined the trip through the hills of Colorado as we viewed the trip, as we would view a trip to the movies. I'm sorry. Uh, it would be filled with wonderful views, sceneries we had never seen before, and cool air, and pleasant nights as we camped along the way, nook and cranny to explore when we stopped. It would be a trip we would remember the rest of our lives. It's what we told ourselves. The preparation to get ready for the trip, Dad had to do some construction because we were taking the pickup on this trip. It was a brand new 1957 Ford 1/2 ton, and it was mint green. I remember it well. It would be able to accommodate all of us very well. Dad worked in Muskogee and drove back and forth 5 days a week. He worked from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that meant that in the winter, he left before daybreak and came home after dark. Just before he got the new pickup, his old truck gave up the ghost one evening and he had to walk about 3 miles home. And he arrived way after dark that summer day. Mom was very concerned. We did not have a phone in our house because the phone lines didn't come that far out. When Dad got home, the guard dog we had was sleeping. He became overexcited when Dad got there. The dog was startled and ran Dad up on top of the old Hudson car. He began to yell for someone in the house to settle the dog down and call him off. We all laughed about this and made Dad upset. But the dog had seen Dad so little because he worked so much. The new pickup had an 8-foot bed, and Dad had begun to build a camper shell over the bed. It was neat looking and had windows along both sides with a sliding glass that opened to a screen to keep insects out. In front of the camper, there was a full size bed that ran across to the pickup, crossways to the pickup sides. This left about half of the bed open for the floor, or from the floor to the top of the camper. The camper had a slight curved top to help shed water, and it had a window in the front that faced the window at the back of the cab. This was probably so they could watch us, but we were told it was so that we could see where we were going. We helped Dad every way we could as the date of departure was drawing near. We had a herd of pigs, about 100 head, which we had to get our neighbors to tend to while we were gone for the 2 weeks. But there was some preparation we would do, and we busied ourselves with that. The camper had a drawer that slid under the bed that contained camping equipment for the trip. The bed in the camper was for Mom and Dad, and the tent was for relaxation when the day's travel was over. We would sleep with our parents on the bed, the girls on the floor of the camper with a pallet, and me in the cab of the truck. We would try out the camper before the mattress was in it and slept there with a pallet. You could see all around because there was windows all along the sides with the sliding windows to open to cool it down inside. The door on the back of the camper lifted up to open it up, and it had a window in it as well. The pickup was a one-tone mint green with the camper a walnut stained dark color wood. The shell, and it looked like it belonged in that pickup. The pickup had a standard transmission, which required the driver to shift quite often when on a long trip, and I'm sure it must have been tiring for Dad as he did all the driving. Day of the trip, or the trip of fear, I think is what I put a subtitle here. The day arrived, and we were all ready to go on this wonderful trip. We would be leaving out early in the morning. The truck had to be packed today in order to get the early start we wanted. My oldest sister had learned at an early age that if she got carsick from riding in the back seat, she would be arranged or assigned the front seat. The trip would be no different. Personally, I don't think she got car sick, but I was just her little brother. We can also be sure that a child would not trick their parents unless the parents were willing to be tricked. So the packing began in earnest. We needed this. We may need that. We needed this. We may need that. We can leave this behind. We must take this as well. The box under the bed became full, and there was still more to go. The box was unloaded and repacked with things we may need, and the camping equipment went in the floor where the girls would sleep because it would be unpacked every evening for the camp. Now, the floor of the camper was raised to a level, to the same level of the bed. There would be no standing room for the trip. This trip began to look a little less comfortable to me now, but I was still excited about it. Dad got us up at 5 a.m. to have breakfast before we left that morning. None of us wanted to get up, and perhaps that could have been an indication of how we might feel by the time the trip ended. Breakfast was quick, and Mom cleaned the house once more before we left. Dad checked everything on the house and on the truck. We were ready to load the people in the truck. Betty, my oldest sister, got in the front and would ride with Mom and Dad, and my baby sister, Diane. That left me, my younger sister, Mary, and my next younger sister, Peggy, and we rode in the back on the bed. We could stretch out and we could nap when we felt like it, and we would not be cramped into the cab. This is what Dad had said to us. Now, on the surface, that may sound wonderful, but when you put into action, it is another thing. Pardon me. We were committed to the trip of almost 2,000 miles because we would go through Colorado and Wyoming and Montana, the panhandle of Idaho, then Washington, Oregon, and into California. We would then have the return trip. We were hoping to go back on Route 66 before the trip was half over. The trip was very unique from the bed of a pickup looking through the cab to the road ahead. When Pikes Peak, pardon me, got a tickle. There we go. The trip was very unique from the bed of the pickup, looking around through the cab on the road ahead. Then Pikes Peak came into view. Dad called for the kids in the back to look. It really was a wonderful sight to see. It grew until it filled half of the windshield of that old truck. The mountains were as grand as we had been told. The first night we camped in Colorado. Did you know that Colorado had the biggest mosquitoes in the world? I know this because I heard Dad say so. I was able to give blood for the first time that night. I may have given a whole pint. I had left the wing windows open to allow some cool air into the cab. The insects found me right away. I learned later in life that they are attracted to the carbon dioxide we breathe out. It somehow makes them eager for the blood of young boys. I really didn't know where we were when we came upon the canyon that is the main thing I remember of the trip. The fear that that canyon instilled into the heart of an otherwise brave young lad is with me to this day. A fear of heights that can make my palms sweat and quicken my pulse and shorten my breath, and it remains with me still. I can see a program on television where someone may be on or in danger of falling from some height, and rush the fear rushes back to me as though I were at that canyon wall once again. We were in one of the states up northwest of Oklahoma, when Dad yelled for us to look as we crossed a large bridge that spanned the canyon. The canyon was no more than a quarter to a half mile wide where we crossed. The canyon, we were told, was about a mile deep and not very wide. And where we crossed it, the road went alongside the canyon when we had crossed the bridge. There was no rails alongside the road as I remember it. It had been raining and the road was wet as we crossed the bridge. My two sisters and I, in the back of the truck, scrambled to look out as we crossed the bridge. Oh my, what a hole, was all I could say when I had seen the bottom of the canyon. The river, if I remember, I think they called it the Snake River, but I could be wrong, was almost out of sight. It was so deep. I was not very alarmed while we were on the bridge, for it had rails and spans that gave me a feeling of safety. When we exited the bridge on the western side, I remember looking to my right and seeing the road going along the rim of the canyon. I could see the cars coming and going along the road. I knew that we would be driving along the rim as we continued the trip. My heart began to sink as I thought of the possibilities of falling into the canyon as we drove along this road with no safety rails. The safety rails would be between us and the abyss, and that would give us or save us from certain doom. I also thought of how long it would take to fall a mile watching from the back of the truck. The road was a narrow little thing, and the sides were dirt, mud to be more precise, since it was raining. The shoulder had deep tire tracks in them, and I was sure if we got off the pavement, the mud would pull us into the canyon. It was only about 30 feet to the edge of the canyon rim from the road. I knew I would see the entire fall from the window in the front of the camper as we plummeted headlong into the abyss. As we came off the bridge, my sisters went to the right side of the camper to look at the canyon and see if they could see the bottom. I began to force them back to the other side of the camper to keep the balance in the truck and the majority of the weight on the side that had the pavement. They kept trying to get to the side where the canyon ran alongside the road, and I continued to prevent them. My heart was racing like a wild animal that, I'm sorry, my heart was racing like a wild animal that was trapped. Fear was overwhelming me, and I think I would have come to violence, or it would have come to violence, if they had not given up trying to see the canyon. I don't remember much of the rest of the trip. I don't remember much of the rest of the trip. And I think it took the rest of that day and night to settle me down. The rest of that day went without my even noticing it, and the rest of the trip, as far as that goes. I know that the fear, whether real or imagined, that overtook me that day has been a driving force in my life. It is a strange thing how we can come to a point where everything from that place forward can be affected by a single event and make such a lasting impression on a young mind that is seldom, if ever, overcome. I know that my fear is very strange because I love to fly in a small airplane. I have never been afraid of a small airplane or even a passenger plane, but put me on the edge of a drop off and my hands sweat and my innards churn and I become very nervous. It has kept me from doing things I would like to do. We went to the Grand Canyon a few years ago and I could not stand very close to the edge. I'm better than I used to be, but still, some things in childhood can become so profound that they follow you forever. Thank you for spending part of your day with me and following me here. If you like that story, I'll be reading another chapter the next time I post. It will be Spooks in the Woods, and it's a childhood memory from 1958. It was wonderful to be able to bring these stories to you. I've wanted my stories out there because I've got 14 books, and this is the best way I could think of doing it. I have a seminar at the Montgomery Public Library teaching people how to write their own books, and I've written a book telling people how to do that as well. But I think we all have stories that ought to be told and they ought to be preserved. And that's part of the reason I started this. We lived in Oklahoma and had our grandchildren in Oklahoma. Then we moved to Florida, and I wasn't sure I would be able to pass these memories on to my grandchildren so they would know what their family history was. And that's what started this journey. I hope you enjoy it. If you like what I do, subscribe and you'll be notified when I post a new video. And you can like it and share so that others might be able to hear these stories. God bless you and keep you safe, and may we all tell our stories as we need to. Oh, wow, let's see. There we go. Have to fix my button so it'll turn off.